Matt Schaff and Jared Small of DraftSharks.com here to get you set for Week 8. We will address some start-sit scenarios, look at the impact of injuries and some other changing situations this week, trying to not only set up our lineups for Week 8, but obviously get our team set for a successful second half of the fantasy season. Jared, lots of stuff going on this week beyond the DeAndre Hopkins trade, which we'll get to in a few minutes, but I think we got to start with the Bucs, because it feels like the most upheaval there with both of their top two receivers going down, receivers that are very important to what has worked for them on offense so far. That leaves plenty of questions, but I think we have to start with no Chris Godwin, no Mike Evans. Are there any wide receivers worth starting in Week 8 fantasy lineups?
I think the short answer for me is no. I'd rather not use any of these guys. And on a week with no teams on bye, I think most fantasy teams, maybe did pick up McMillan or Trey Palmer won't need to use them. I just want to see what the usage is going to look like. And specifically, I want to see who is getting the most snaps in the slot, because that's the role. That was kind of why we were above consensus on Chris Godwin this summer, is because there was all the talk about him going back into the slot. OC Liam Cohen, comes from that Sean McVay tree. So we kind of thought Godwin would be in a Cooper Kupp-ish role. And I think that's part of the reason why Godwin was so good. I want to see who gets that. And I think it might end up being a rotation. I don't think there's going to be a pure Chris Godwin replacement. I do think McMillan can do it, though. He was primarily a slot receiver at Washington. He can play on the outside too. And the Bucs talked up his, position versatility multiple times this summer. So again, I don't think he'll get all the Godwin work, but I think McMillan is capable of playing in the slot. I think we should be hoping he's the slot guy, because I do think McMillan is the guy with the most upside among this group.
If you need to pick a Bucs receiver, then Jalen McMillan looks like the best bet. It's been a good pass offense so far. We'll get to Baker Mayfield's numbers in a minute, but we are still talking about a rookie. We're talking about the first game without both Godwin and Mike Evans. They might be terrible. They might not. They might be okay this week. It's a solid matchup, especially for wideouts. Atlanta has been the 7th best scoring matchup by our adjusted fantasy points allowed for the position. So it wouldn't be shocking to see Jalen McMillan or somebody else at the position giving you numbers, but it's all new. We haven't seen any of the guys that will be among the top 3 Bucs wideouts this week have that kind of role so far, especially without Godwin and Mike Evans, who, like we said, dominated the passing landscape in that offense. So it's just a lot of unknowns. You can take a shot if you want to. I think a lot of times we talk about looking at how much you pay to get a player off of waivers, and the more you pay, the more that means you should start him. I think that differs a little bit for Jalen McMillan this week, because you're not grabbing him as a 1-week player. You're grabbing him because the opportunity just skyrocketed. We are going to be missing Mike Evans for at least 3 games, Chris Godwin for the rest of the season. So it's a longer term investment. If you did get McMillan this week, I don't think you should feel like you need to go ahead and throw him in your starting lineup, even if you spent something like, 30% of your budget to get him.
Yeah, if McMillan goes off on your bench, it'll stink a little bit, but at least you have him on your roster, and again, can use him for at least the next 2 weeks, because it sounds like Mike Evans is going to miss Tampa's next 3 games.
The best bet for the Bucs this week, and it's probably not a good sign for the Bucs right now, seems like tight end Cade Otton, tight end 11 in our PPR rankings, ahead of Sam Laporta. Did I read that right, Jared?
You did, and I know that was a debate when we were kind of going through the rankings on Tuesdays, like Otton, Laporta. I do think Laporta beats Otton in upside, right? Like with Jameson Williams, we assume he's going to miss this game on suspension. Laporta could go back to the role he had last year, and if that's the case, he beats Otton in upside. But I think Otton is undoubtedly the safer play this week, just based on projected target volume. Otton's already 4th among tight ends in targets this season. He's 5th in catches. A lot of that has to do with the Bucs being one of the pass heaviest offenses in the NFL. I think we're projecting the pass rate to come down without their top 2 wide receivers. It should, but that's going to be offset by an increase in target share for Cade Otton without those top 2 wide receivers. So I think Otton, he's probably one of the best 5 or 6 target bets at tight end this week. That makes him a pretty comfortable fantasy starter.
And it helps that it's not even totally projection on him right now. He's had 6+ catches in 3 of his past 5 games. So we don't have to say, this is what I think will happen. It's more like we know that he's used heavily and they don't have a whole lot else to fall back on right now. So especially if they fall behind Atlanta this week. Tight end 11, like I said, but I think there's upside from there in PPR formats. And then the other part of putting together this whole offensive picture, you mentioned bringing down the pass rate. That'll depend a bit on what happens with with the backfield. And we had all three of these guys, following Sean Tucker's breakout, with Rachaad White back from injury. All three guys in the lineup last week. So what did the usage look like there, and what are we expecting this week, including a potential Bucky Irving injury?
That's a big one. And it sounds like Irving is not practicing again today. So if he's out, then we're back to a two-man show. So what happened last week is that all three guys played. White and Irving basically stayed in the split they'd been in, right? With White kind of just ahead in playing time, pretty even in carries, White doing a bit more passing game work. But then you had Sean Tucker taking like 15 to 20% of the backfield work away from both White and Irving equally. So a really ugly three-man committee where if all three guys are healthy, Irving and White are the two guys we can use, right? Again, Tucker was getting like 15 to 20% of the work. He's not usable. The good thing for all these guys is this should become a much more running back centric offense with these wide receiver injuries. Even last week with Godwin playing most of that game, the running backs combined for a 24% target share. They could, be at that mark, maybe even higher going forward, because I think White and Irving especially are good pass catching backs. I think if they're all healthy, White and Irving can be used as RB3 flex plays with obviously more value in PPR. And then again, if Irving misses, I think Tucker just kind of takes Irving's spot in the rankings.
Yeah, I think White especially could start getting wide receiver level target shares. Not saying like Chris Godwin or Mike Evans level target shares, but number 3 wide receiver level target shares, which could certainly propel him into greater PPR value than what we would otherwise expect from how he's produced so far. Like he could be along the lines of Austin Eckler with the Chargers when they had Austin Eckler as part of a split backfield, not toward the end of his run there, where he was the primary guy. It's a helpful situation for Rachaad White's outlook. I would love to not have to use any of them this week, but I'm sure there are plenty of teams that need to. And then Baker Mayfield has been the fantasy revelation there. He's had 1 week so far outside the top 7 fantasy quarterbacks, 1 out of 7 weeks. 4 of his 7 games have found him finishing inside the top 3. Baker Mayfield has been excellent in fantasy so far. How far down from that do we push him for this dramatic shift in what the offense is going to look like?
I think he's got to get pushed down pretty far. I mean, you can't overstate what the loss of both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin means. I mean, when he gets Evans back, I think Baker will be fine. Maybe you can still use him as a lower end quarterback one, but just put some numbers to Godwin and Evans this season. They've accounted for 46% of Tampa Bay's catches, 49% of the receiving yards, and 61% of the receiving touchdowns. It's a massive loss for Baker. He is playing well. He's scrambling like a madman out there. He's averaging 23 rushing yards per game. So that's kind of helped the fantasy value, and that should continue. Maybe he scrambles even more if he's not, finding guys open without those top 2 wide receivers. And then, the matchup this Sunday is decent. Atlanta's 19th in adjusted fantasy points allowed. Baker sitting in like mid-range quarterback 2 territory in our rankings. I think I would not want to use him in a 1 quarterback league.
Yeah, sitting QB 20 in our week 8 rankings on the site right now. Usually guys in that range are players that you don't care about keeping them on your roster. I would keep Mayfield rostered for now while we wait to see what happens. We talked about all the uncertainty with the wide receivers. We also don't know that losing those 2 guys for whatever stretch is going to kill Baker Mayfield's value. We're assuming, starting out the first week that it's going to take a huge hit, but maybe he'll be fine this week, and maybe you'll feel decent about keeping him on your roster as a platoon guy going forward. So I wouldn't give up on him yet. The Browns are done with their quarterback, Deshaun Watson, who's done for the season. And because I guess God watches football every Sunday, we also got a Dorian Thompson-Robinson injury. So that means Jameis Winston is going to start at quarterback for Cleveland this week. The other change for the Browns is that they are handing over play calling duties. Kevin Stefanski is doing that, letting Ken Dorsey, the offensive coordinator, call the plays. Not sure how much that one matters, but both of those together, Jared, what do you expect generally for this offense this week?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about the DTR injury is he was a full participant in Wednesday's practice. So it seems to me that the Browns are just going with Winston regardless of the DTR injury, which is what they would do if they're still interested in winning. We'll see. If they lose another few games, they might just say, screw it, we want to get another look at DTR, even though I think it's pretty clear he's not a long-term answer. But I do think Jameis probably starts for at least the next few weeks. We'll kind of see where it goes from there. The offense has to be better because according to the Ringer's Austin Gale, no quarterback with 200 plus dropbacks in the first 7 weeks of the season since 2000 had a lower EPA per dropback than Deshaun Watson. So he's quite literally been the worst NFL quarterback since 2,000, at least in terms of, expected points added. So I think Jameis Winston's going to be an upgrade. We kind of know what Jameis Winston is. He's a gunslinger out there. He's going to make mistakes, but he's going to throw the ball downfield. He's going to throw touchdowns. He's going to rack up passing yards. For this week, I still don't trust any of the wide receivers, right? I mean, David Njoku is a strong play. I think we kind of see how Jameis plays, see how the wide receiver rotation works out for a second week with Amari Cooper. I do think Jameis gives this passing game more fantasy upside.
Yeah, David Njoku especially has seen terrific usage in 2 games back from injury. What have we seen on that front from him?
Yeah, 20 targets over the last 2 weeks. Only Brock Bowers has more over that span. And that's even with David Njoku's snaps being a bit limited back in week 6 as he came off the ankle and knee injury. So I think there's even more upside, I think, from a target share perspective. And again, we expect the Browns to throw plenty. We expect the passing game to be better with the Jameis Winston. To me, I mean, Njoku's an easy top 8 fantasy tight end the rest of the way. And he could even be a top 5 fantasy tight end based on the volume, based on the fact that he's a good player, right? I mean, he can break big plays, really good after the catch. So he definitely could be a top 5 scorer the rest of the way.
Yeah, if you have Njoku right now, feel good about it. He might be the thing that's going for the Browns offense the rest of the way. We'll see if Jerry Jeudy can reemerge. I don't even know what you would call it for him at this point now that there's a different quarterback. 49ers have plenty of issues going on as well. Let's start with the health front. Obviously, we know Brandon Ayuk's done for the season. Deebo Samuel is out of the hospital but did not practice Wednesday. He's dealing with pneumonia and apparently a wrist issue as well, which is on the injury report. No practice Wednesday for George Kittle because of a foot injury. No practice for Jauan Jennings still off his hip injury that kept him out of the lineup last week. So, I mean, the first thing we have to say about this Niners offense is we'll see exactly who's actually going to be in the lineup come Sunday, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's a Sunday night game too, which could make this really tricky if we get, a game time decision tag on these guys. Deebo Samuel did do some running off to the side of Wednesday's practice, and Kyle Shanahan said, quote, he's doing better than you'd expect, and quote, has a chance to play versus the Cowboys on Sunday night. So that's kind of better than I was expecting to hear on Deebo this early in the week. George Kittle dealing with the foot sprain. Kyle Shanahan did call him day-to-day earlier this week, so it doesn't seem super serious. And then Jauan Jennings, we kind of have no idea what's going on. I did want to talk about Ricky Pearsall because I read an article from Matt Barrows of The Athletic, and he said Pearsall is training at Brandon Ayuk's split end position. Jauan Jennings' big game came with Deebo Samuel out of the lineup. So I'm starting to wonder if, at least, longer term, the Niners see Ricky Pearsall as the Brandon Ayuk replacement and Jauan Jennings more as the replacement if Deebo Samuel misses games. We'll see who's available on Sunday night. Like if Jennings or Deebo are in there, I wouldn't feel great using Pearsall in fantasy lineups, but if both those guys are out, I think Pearsall will slide into at least like wide receiver 4 range in our week 8 rankings and is someone you consider using.
If we know before the games start on Sunday that we won't have Deebo Samuel or Jauan Jennings for that Sunday night game, who would you rather start between Ricky Pearsall and Jalen McMillan?
Pearsall.
I would have to agree with that as well. He's in that same kind of category where I would like to not have to use him, but I would certainly feel better about going ahead and trusting the de facto number 1 receiver in San Francisco than I would the de facto number 1 receiver in Tampa Bay. I guess San Francisco is probably the top offense in terms of, I'll go ahead and take a shot on that guy, right? Yeah. I mean, is anybody even close? Maybe Kansas City is Kansas City seems like one where we want it to be that, but there are many examples of guys that we tried to trust in that vein and it didn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, 2022 Kansas City was that way, but definitely not anymore. Yeah, it's San Francisco for me. I mean, we saw Jauan Jennings had, I think it's got to be still the biggest fantasy game of any wide receiver, maybe any player this season when Deebo Samuel missed that game. So it's just a super efficient offense. Nothing to worry about in the matchup with the Cowboys. And then, just comparing McMillan and Pearsall, I mean, we're talking about a 3rd-round rookie in McMillan versus a 1st-round rookie in Pearsall. I think that means something. So I would like to have Pearsall as like a wide receiver 4 flex play if Deebo and Jennings end up missing the Sunday night game.
And there's nothing physically wrong with Brock Purdy right now, but we're going to have to watch all these pass catcher injuries for him because I got to think that if we have no Deebo, no George Kittle, maybe Brock Purdy's a candidate to potentially move down our rankings for week 8.
For sure. I mean, he's quarterback 10 right now, and that's with us projecting Deebo and George Kittle playing. If one of those guys even misses, I would think Purdy's going to fall out of our top 12.
Even with those injuries, by the way, the 49ers are still 6-point home favorites against Dallas. So I expect this to be a run-heavy game either way, unless Dallas plays a lot better than you would expect in a road game. But Cowboys sure don't look like a team capable of shocking anyone with how well they're playing right now.
For sure.
The Dolphins get Tua Tagovailoa back this week. We're expecting him to play in this game. And this game is against Arizona, which is 26th in total defensive DVOA, 29th against the pass. Not a great way to head into a matchup with Miami. Tua is at QB 11, Jared, in our rankings. And that says a lot, I think, about what we expect from this Dolphins offense in his return game.
It was a concussion for Tua. So, like, yes, there's a risk that if he takes another hit, like, he's out for the game. But also, I think if he's on the field, like, there shouldn't be any lingering effects from that head injury. Like, it should be 100% Tua Tagovailoa. So I do feel good about him as a low-end quarterback one this week. I mean, so the Dolphins averaged 10 points per game over the last 4 games without Tua. They're implied for 25 points this week. So that just gives you an idea of, the difference we're talking about with Tua back. Tyreek Hill, obviously. Jalen Waddle, I'd feel good about getting him back into lineups as a wide receiver too. Devon Achane must start. His usage has been strong. Achane, by the way, in case people forgot, he was RB2 and RB3 in PPR points the first 2 weeks of the season with Tua. So had some massive games there. Even like Raheem Mostert, I think, is back in play this week as an RB3 or flex, just because we expect this Dolphins offense to actually score some points.
And notably, Achane caught 7 passes in each of those first 2 games. So there's obviously a nice outlook for this week, in part because of that opponent. If we get a healthy Tua the rest of the season, this could go back to being an offense that gives us a lot of points. And that sets up this week as kind of the last chance to buy any of these Dolphins players at what might still be a discounted rate. You might not find it. It's probably going to differ by league, but there still might be an opportunity to get a discount because it's a little bit tough to look at what's happened since Tua went down and like mentally reset to the heights that these guys are capable of when everything is firing, right?
Go back and look at 2023 stats and fantasy finishes and just remind yourself like how good, I think Tyreek Hill was wide receiver 2. Jalen Waddle was like wide receiver 20, despite missing parts of a bunch of games with injuries. So do that and then go make some trade offers. And yeah, you're not going to get these guys super cheap because anyone holding Dolphins guys like knows Tua is coming back this week. But like you said, Matt, people might have just forgotten how productive these guys can be with a healthy Tua.
Yeah, and if you do want to go after him, don't be afraid to go a little higher in that price because that's what it's going to take, and they are worth it. And if you're worried about Tua's, risk of leaving again, I mean, every quarterback is one hit away from leaving a game. Tua made it through 17 games last year, so maybe he suffers a concussion this week and is done for the season, or maybe he makes it through the rest of the year and everybody scores the way we want them to. That's, part of the game here. DeAndre Hopkins heads into his first week as a member of the Kansas City Chiefs, Jared. It's easy to like Hopkins the rest of the season. What do we do with him in week 8, though?
Yeah, I'm going to say the same thing I said about Amari Cooper last week. And if I can help it, I don't want to use DeAndre Hopkins this week. I know Cooper ended up having a nice fantasy game last week, but kind of as we expected, he ran a pass route on 34% of the Bills' pass plays. Like that's risky starting someone on that level of playing time. The Hopkins trade didn't even officially go through until this morning, so he did not practice with the team on Wednesday. I assume he'll get there in time to get some work in today on Thursday here. So he's going to have 2 practices with the team before this game against the Raiders on Sunday. I don't think we're going to see the Chiefs throw it a whole lot in a game they're big favorites in. So Hopkins could do the Amari Cooper and score a touchdown on one of his few catches, but I think the floor is pretty low there. And again, I'd try not to use him.
Yeah, I agree that the floor is low. I don't think that the ceiling is especially high because I don't think that we'll get full playing time. But I think it's very similar to Amari Cooper with the Bills, who were at home heavily favored against the Titans. I think that game ended up being closer than expected through the first half of it, but it ended up being a Bills blowout by the end of it. Very similar situation. I think similarly, the Chiefs will probably look to get Hopkins involved right away. We've got, a smart, experienced player who has played for his 4th team now. We've got a smart offensive coach. We've got the best quarterback in the league. So, even on a limited route total, limited number of targets, there's definitely scoring potential here. So it would be in a similar range for me where very bottom of wide receiver 3 territory, high 40s at wide receiver. I could see playing Hopkins over any of the guys in that range. But it's also worth noting that there are no teams on bye this week. So there are a lot more, even with the injuries, there are a lot more wide receivers in the pool. So be apprehensive, but I would say if it's close, this is one of the few guys, one of the few situations where it's okay to just go ahead and take a shot and say, I think he does something. And then obviously we'll be watching for any more news on the situation heading into the weekend.
Yeah, I want to see how Hopkins is listed on the Chiefs injury report too, because he's obviously been dealing with the knee thing. He didn't play a whole lot in the second half of that game last week. I think Brian Callahan said Hopkins was dealing with like a leg soreness is how he termed it. Now, the fact that the Chiefs went through with this trade, like there must not be any like serious injury that they're worried about, but just interested to see if he's like on the injury report, because that could, further limit his snaps if he's not quite at 100%.
He might have also been going through, we're going to trade you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Beyond DeAndre Hopkins in that Kansas City offense, what should I think of Xavier Worthy if he's been on my team? Should I be worried now that they clearly traded for somebody who will probably at least lead Chiefs wide receivers and targets the rest of the way?
Yeah, it's been an interesting week for Worthy because, like, after kind of looking through what happened in week 7 and watching that game, seeing Patrick Mahomes miss Xavier Worthy for what would have been a 71-yard touchdown. Like, Worthy had 2 or 3 steps on his defender, and Mahomes just overshot him. And then seeing that Worthy had a season high 30% target share coming out of the bye week. So the Chiefs, to me, like, clearly made it a point to try to get Worthy going coming out of the bye week. It didn't work, but I was still like super optimistic for him going forward after the game. The Hopkins trade obviously changes things. I think it caps Worthy's volume upside, right? Like, I think Hopkins and Kelsey are going to be the top 2 targets, but Worthy, you were never drafting him to be a, 8 to 10 target guy. It was always, this is a guy that can break big plays in an offense that is kind of, designed to help these guys break big plays. I'd be trying to trade for him right now if I could, because I think he's been disappointing. His owners are probably worried about the Hopkins trade, but I still think, Hopkins could open up more space for Xavier Worthy. He's still a guy that there's no reason he shouldn't be getting 6-ish targets per game, right? He should be the kind of the clear number 3 option in this passing game, which I think is enough considering his skill set and considering Patrick Mahomes, enough to make Worthy someone who, could give you some spike weeks over the second half of the season.
I think Hopkins' arrival is good for Xavier Worthy's fantasy outlook the rest of the way. He has seen 4.8 targets and 2.5 receptions per game through the first 6 weeks. So he wasn't on a path to be, clear number 1 receiver for the Chiefs this season. I don't think he should have been. We're talking about a rookie speed guy downfield. I think he's more of a compliment, especially at the beginning of his career. And all of the injuries to, Marquise Brown, Rashee Rice, there's nobody complimenting him. So it's a lot easier to gear up against the guy that's going downfield when all you have to worry about is Travis Kelce catching a 5-yard pass. Teams will allow that to happen rather than, letting somebody beat them deep for a touchdown. The other part here, though, is that Kansas City has not been throwing the ball very much. Their pass rate over expected is down, and it has been down since Rashee Rice left the field. And that makes sense. Their wide receiver core is deteriorating. Makes sense to lean further on the run and away from the pass. They're way down in pass attempts from where they were last year. I think when you add DeAndre Hopkins, you're not only building up the wide receiver core, but you're also setting up your team to throw the ball more going forward. And if there's more passing volume, that's obviously going to help everybody. Patrick Mahomes through 6 games is averaging just 31.2 pass attempts per game. That's down from 37.3 last year. And he was over 38 each of the previous 3 seasons. So if he's throwing 5-6 more times every game than he was before the trade, that's helping everybody, even if you're the number 2, number 3 option on your offense. And especially if you're the guy with speed that can turn any given play into a score, then there's room for you to produce alongside Patrick Mahomes. Now, Patrick Mahomes, how much is he going to rebound? Because we talked about in the past 2 weeks, he's dropped down to the point where we're barely even starting him. He's on the fringe of QB1 territory. So are we now looking at potentially elite fantasy production the rest of the way? What do we do with this, Jared, as far as Mahomes goes?
Yeah, so Mahomes is currently quarterback 20 in fantasy points per game. So, is he going to rebound from that? Yes, I'm pretty confident he's going to be better than quarterback 20 the rest of the way. Is he going to get back to elite, even like top 5 status? I don't think so. I mean, one, I like DeAndre Hopkins. This is not, though, 2020 DeAndre Hopkins. He's a good receiver. He's a big upgrade for the Chiefs. He's not like this alpha stud wide receiver. The second thing is, I am with you, Matt. I think the Chiefs pass rate over expected climbs going forward. I also don't think you're going to get to, peak Mahomes volume levels that we saw in previous seasons, because this Chiefs defense is just good. When Mahomes was trucking it 37 times per game, that was a bad Chiefs defense. That team was in a lot of shootouts. Chiefs are not a shootout team now. The Chiefs are a low scoring team, right? Like, they want to play defense. They're going to run the ball. They're going to get Isaiah Pacheco back at some point here. That's only going to help the running game. So I think Mahomes' volume climbs. I think he's going to get more efficient with DeAndre Hopkins. But again, I don't think he's getting back to top 5 quarterback status. I think probably low end quarterback 1 is kind of where he's going to reside for most of the rest of the season.
Yeah, he's been sitting around QB 12, 13 in our weekly rankings. I think he's going to rebound to the point where we can put him there without having to argue him up to that spot. But I don't think that anybody should expect a rebound all the way to where he was getting drafted this year, which I think will remain too high, which was inside the top 5 at the position. So if you have Mahomes and somebody in your league is expecting that and is willing to pay top price for him, I would certainly be willing to let Mahomes go. I would not be chasing Mahomes to buy him because I think that you need to get beyond, QB 12 to really be a difference maker in most one QB formats. So that's what makes him a hold for us this week.
Yep, agreed.
Javonte Williams was somebody that was nice to hold last week, comfy and warm to hold, Jared. 2 touchdowns against the Saints. But beyond that, is there reason to believe in him going forward?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we just saw the ceiling game for Javonte, right? Like easy Broncos win over a bad Saints run defense, and Javonte delivered a big game for us. I kind of think he's like a lower end RB2 going forward, just based on like his usage and the Broncos offense. But Javonte's usage has been better lately. You can see all the numbers in my week 7 usage article, but his snap rate, route rate, carry share, and target share are all up from the first 3 games of the season to the last 4. And over those last 4 games, he's 22nd among running backs in expected PPR points per game. So that's kind of the level I'm viewing him at. He's not dominating the backfield. We're still getting Jaleel McLaughlin. We're still getting a little bit Audric Estime, but like Williams has become the clear leader in this backfield. The offense is fine enough at this point where I think you can use him as a lower end RB2. He does get another dream matchup this week against the Panthers, so he sits a bit higher than that in our week 8 rankings. But like beyond that, I think RB20 to RB26 is where you're going to find Javonte in our rankings most weeks.
The touchdowns were great. You obviously enjoyed having him in your lineup last week, or if he wasn't in your lineup last week, then it's going to make you feel more strongly about putting him in your lineup this week. But the usage matters a lot for figuring out what we can expect going forward. So make sure to check out all the details in Jared's usage report on Javonte Williams and other guys, including other guys that we've talked about here. Now, that Carolina matchup is awesome. I would absolutely try to keep Javonte Williams through that. On the other side of that, Denver is at Baltimore, at Kansas City, home for Atlanta, which has actually been a negative running back matchup so far this season. Then at the Raiders, good spot, versus Cleveland, which hasn't been a great matchup for running back scoring. And then a week 14 bye, which is annoyingly timed for fantasy teams. So keep all that in mind. And maybe after this Carolina game, if we get another really good outing from Javonte Williams, he might be a sell candidate, not the kind that you need to get rid of, for whatever, but maybe somebody that you could sell at an inflated rate.
Yeah, I could see selling Javonte after this Panthers game. I could also see buying him after that Chiefs-Ravens stretch, because the Chiefs-Ravens stretch is brutal. I assume he's going to have 2 pretty rough games there. Although, I mean, the target share has been around like 16% over this last month, so that could keep him relevant. But he could even kind of go back to being a buy after those 2 tough matchups.
Yeah, go ahead and sell him and then buy him back right after that happens. Exactly. It's the way to do this. Finally, let's talk about Jayden Reed, because he showed up in our week 7 trade targets article as a sell, because at that point he was wide receiver 3 in PPR points per game, wide receiver 37 in expected. I love the player. I think he is going to remain that kind of efficient player where he scores better than what his usage says, especially because his quarterback looks like he's very good based on the past 2 seasons of evidence. But the past 2 weeks have also shown the vulnerability in Jayden Reed. He had 6 catches for just 28 yards against the Cardinals 2 weeks ago, 2 catches for 10 yards against Houston last week. And both of those, by the way, were in games Green Bay won. So they can afford to let their arguably best receiver, just be a short range performer, and their offense is still okay. Still scored 24 plus points in both of those games. So I guess, are you agreeing on selling him?
Yeah, Reed is kind of playing out, I think, how we expected him to this summer, just as a really talented player in a crowded offense. And he's a guy who still is not playing at all in 2 wide receiver sets. And that does matter a little, right? Like it has his route rates in the 70s rather than, someone like Romeo Doubs, who's up near 90% of the routes. So, Reed is losing like 4 or 5 chances per game to get a target. And that does matter. If you look at his fantasy finishes this season so far, he has a wide receiver 1 overall finish. He has a wide receiver 2 overall finish. He's been outside the top 24 wide receivers in PPR points in all of his other 5 games. And that includes each of the last 3 with Jordan Love. So he's just been super volatile. He's just tied for 37th among wide receivers in targets. Some of that is the 2 games that he played with Malik Willis, but he's also averaging just 6 targets per game with Jordan Love this season, with kind of a wide receiver 3 level volume. I'd still consider Reed like a wide receiver 2 going forward, like a volatile wide receiver 2, just because he is so efficient, because he's good. His quarterback is good. I think you probably missed the sell window for now, right? Coming off the 2 disappointing games, I'd probably hold him for now, especially this weekend with the Jaguars matchup coming up. Jacksonville dead last in adjusted fantasy points to wide receivers. Really should be a big game for that Packers passing game. And, Reed as good a bet as any of those wide receivers to, be the beneficiary of that. So I would hold him this week. If he has another huge game against Jacksonville, that could, reopen a sell window if you can get, top 12, even top 15 level wide receiver value for him in return.
Yeah, I would imagine that it's still open just because he did score in that game against Arizona, and he does have the Jacksonville matchup, which is pretty clearly a good one. So, it depends always on what you have, what you're looking for. One guy is not necessarily a sell for everybody. And like we say with most of the players, Jayden Reed is not a sell for whatever you can get player. He's going to stay productive. It's merely if you find somebody that's willing to pay wide receiver 1 prices, go for it. And if not, just enjoy it and try to navigate the volatility. Check the trade navigator as well as the free agent finder for all of your sync teams to determine ways to improve your specific roster as you go. Those tools are synced to your exact team so they know what's available in your league, what you need, and can help guide you. We've got our weekly rankings and rest of season rankings live on the site. They're updated pretty much daily at this point for injuries and other happenings. So we'll be on top of that. You can always count on the most updated numbers in there and keep watch on those throughout the week for the latest player projections, values, and preferences. And then, of course, those feed into your team intel pages, which tell you specifically who we would start in your lineup for the given week in your specific positions. All those tools, every bit of content that we put out here are designed to make Draft Sharks your unfair advantage.